So we're going to have a look at how to annotate a poem here. This is one from the Ted Hughes collection. We've looked at a couple of poems already. We've seen some of Hughes's approaches to nature. Always think about the poems that you've seen in that group of poems, if this isn't the first poem that you're looking at in the group. And also bear in mind what you've learned already about context and any critical opinions. But don't lead with context. So we're not going to go into this poem looking for evidence of the things we've learned about Hughes and his life and times. We're going to look at the poem for what it is, but we have in the back of our mind what we know about Hughes, his life, his times, his interests and his styles. And where that can help us, we bring it in and make it relevant. But the primary objective is to look at what the poem does, what it's about, what the ideas are about, and how we respond to it. So here we are, Crow's first lesson. Of course, we think of the title. That's always important. But we don't put too much time into the title because I think you'll see students often at the kind of lower end of the mark scale write about the title too much, and it does make examiners jump to the idea that, or jump to the opinion that you don't know the poem enough and that you're afraid of getting into the poem. But Crow's first lesson. So before we even start reading it, we're thinking perhaps about a fledgling bird that perhaps is on the ground, having come out of the nest and is learning to fly. That's what we would, if you're interested in your crows and nature, you'd know that would be what's going on here. But is that what Hughes goes on to do? Let's not forget his interest in mythology and what a crow might represent as well. And of course, this is part of a book of poems that Hughes published in 1970, in which Crow ran through the poems as a character, meaning a lot more than just a bird. God. So we front focus the word God here. Perhaps this is a good moment actually to pause this video and just read the poem to yourself before making notes. Assuming you've taken the time to read the poem there. God tried to teach Crow how to talk. So we've got characters here in the poem, and perhaps we look in this first line at what is front and end focused. We've got God up front. We've got talk end focused, and that focused, optional whether there's two S's or not. American spelling would be two S's. We've got immediately that the crow is meaning something, and of course, once we go into talk, we've got human features, and then of course we think about Hughes's mythological interest here. Love, said God. Say, love and love again. Personified or capitalized, that capital L the second time round. Crow gaped. And I think about the connotations of that. Some of them rude. This is a very loaded word here, and a dynamic verb, a verb with movement in it. And the white shark crashed into the sea. So with this gape here now, we get the connotations of it referring to the crow's mouth. We think of the shark's mouth. The white shark crashed, and again there's some sound here now. We've got sibilants, S and SH noises, and in crash we've got onomatopoeia, onomatopoeia, crashed into the sea. And then here we have what we call enjambement, or the line break, and it rolls on, crashed into the sea and went rolling, dynamic, downwards. Alliteration here, discovering its own depth, alliteration of plosives. Now, after looking at that first stanza, the other thing to be very careful about is don't feature spot. Right? So just identifying the things that we've spotted here. There's no point doing that unless we can talk about why those things are there. But let's look. We've got a very, very phonologically active stanza here. Lots of noise, lots of movement. And so that's what we need to think about, the effect of the stuff we've seen. We've got onomatopoeic, the sea is brought to life here. And then this movement of the sea and the downwards, discovering its own depth. And when I look at all of this together, if I look at the imagery here, so if we look at something like, the sea and the depth, we've got the shark, we've got the rolling downwards, the gaped. I'm going to call all of these imagery. We're talking about something primordial or primeval. Oh, that's a tough bit of spelling. Primeval. Check spelling. It's the dawn of time. This is a poem about creation, and all of a sudden we get the idea that when God is relating to Crow, the character Crow, that it's while God is creating the sea and creating the shark, God brings these other animals into existence through giving Crow this lesson on how to talk. And so we've got mythology coming in here now as well. In pagan mythology, the role of the crow as perhaps some sort of godly or ungodly creature. No, no, said God, say love. Now try it, love. And now we get this gaped. Connotations of gaped here is empty. Crow is failing to say the word. The crow can't love. And a blue fly, a tsitsi, a mosquito zoomed. And again, we get structurally the same enjambment again. Another roll on or run on line, also known as enjambment. More onomatopoeia. Zoomed out, and again we've got a connection between these two words here, downwards and down to their sundry flesh pots. So God creates what would we call them? Vampire insects. Crow can't love, God creates the shark. Crow can't love, God creates the vampire insects. Each time the crow can't say love, something else difficult for human existence is brought into the world. A final try, said God. Now, love. Chronology or temporal. Temporal means to do with time features here in this poem. God's running out of patience. Now, love, the pressure that Crow is under. Crow convulsed. This time the word convulsed is brought in front. Gaped, wretched. So we have this gaped running through. This is called a parallelism, or forgive me, mathematicians, if I got my double L's in the wrong places there. Parallelism of gaped occurs 3 times, but this time we've got extra dynamic verbs around it. Movement. And man's bodiless, prodigious head. And now here we've got repeated enjambment. And so the movement that we have here with the enjambments occurring in the penultimate line here. In fact, there's 2 of them here. And then we've got lots of enjambments. So the amount of enjambment increases with each stanza here. And we can see through that the sort of control over movement seems to be weakening. And each time God gets angrier with the crow's inability to respond, God unleashes more movement and more devastation. Crow convulsed, gaped, wretched, and man's bodiless, prodigious head bulbed out onto the earth with swivelling eyes, jabbering protest. And there's even then an enjambment between the stanzas. Man gets created. Man is the worst of these creatures. Man is the worst one. The worst creation. And Crow retched again, before God could stop him. God lost control. And woman's vulva dropped over man's neck and tightened. Now, mythology here. Shark's mouth. Something that has also been used mythologically as a metaphor for female reproductive organ. Attitudes to gender are worth thinking about here. This is not long after Hughes's. We've got to mention Plath at some point. Hughes's ill-fated relationship with Plath, and Hughes was in a very difficult place in his mind with his attitude to women and relationships at this time, and it's consistent with the Bible in that woman is made second, but it uses mythology here really for the creation myth. Well, scholars, secular scholars, would describe the Genesis as a creation myth as well. And so there's no mention of Adam and Eve. The two struggled together on the grass. God struggled to part them, cursed, wept. Are they going to reproduce? Is that what God struggled to prevent? Did God want to stop man and woman coming together and being able to create humanity? Crow flew guiltily off. Doesn't take responsibility. Doesn't take responsibility for creating humanity. Out of his failings. It's because Crow couldn't love that humanity is brought into existence. Pretty dark.